Hey y'all, welcome to my Bennett guide as of Genshin Impact 3.8. I'm sure that by this point, you all know how ridiculously broken Bennett actually is, so I'll spare the introductions. Let's jump right into this guide, starting with his talents. Bennett's normal attack. Yup, they're normal attacks alright. It's not worth any level of investment unless he's C6, which I'll come back to later on in the video. But let's move on to his elemental skill. Bennett's elemental skill, Passion Overload, is actually really simple, but damn is it good. It does have press and hold variants, but you should generally only be using the press version unless you're feeling fancy. What it is a simple swipe of Pyro if it's pressed, and if it's held, there are different charge levels depending on how long you decide to hold it, that does more damage and knocks him and the enemy back when fully charged. Again, not worth holding it since that will prolong its cooldown when its strength is having extremely low cooldown that can be further shortened through his passive talents, which I'll get to after talking about his burst. Bennett's elemental burst, Fantastic Voyage, is single-handedly the best ability in the game, bar none. Bennett slams the floor with an inspiration field, the thing that coined the term circle impact. Not only does it heal your active character, it applies pyro on them to erase other elemental related statuses. And finally, if your active character is at greater than or equal to 70% of their max HP, it gives a flat attack buff based on Bennett's base attack. How big is the attack buff? It can be over 1000. So yeah, it makes sense why he's widely considered to be the honorary 6-star character in the game. One thing to note about it is the buff will depend on how much base attack Bennett has. The higher the base attack, the more his field buffs. Base attack is calculated by adding the character's base attack, which you can increase by leveling him, and the weapon he has equipped. For that reason, the easiest way to increase this buff is through maxing out Bennett's level and giving him the highest base attack weapon you have. Remember that base attack are made up of those two factors alone. Artifacts, sets, or stats, and support abilities have nothing to do with it. Bennett's first ascension passive reduces the cooldown on his elemental skill. That's it, simple and clean. Nice buff to his skill to let it generate more particles even faster. If you thought his skill was already on a low cooldown, check out this passive. While he's in the inspiration field, his elemental skill cooldown is reduced by a further 50%, making it have a grand total cooldown of 2 seconds. On top of that, should you decide to fully charge a skill, it won't knock him back. This passive super speeds his particle generation, so yeah, it's pretty amazing. Now that you know what he does, what talents should you prioritize leveling first? Well, as if I didn't make it obvious enough, Ultra prioritizes Burst first to give your team the highest attack buff and healing per tick. Bennett's skill is optional but would be second in line in terms of priority, and lastly his normal attack shouldn't be touched until C6. By now you should have a good idea of why he's insanely good, but how can you build yours to get him there? First things first, if you want to completely maximize Bennett's Inspiration Field's attack buff, you should prioritize leveling him to 90 first. This won't be the biggest deal breaker if you don't, but should you want to max it out completely, that is what you should do. Next up, his preferred artifact sets. For Bennett's usual support role, his best artifact set is the Force Set Noblesse Oblige, mainly for the 20% extra attack buff that you get after using his elemental burst, tying in insanely well to give more attack to him and his teammates. The burst damage bonus is also nice to have in the case that you want him to do some damage. Next up is the 4-piece Instructor set. Yeah, a 4-star set. I know what you might be thinking, but hold on. Instructor can actually be really good if you're running a reaction team where attack isn't the main stat you need, and instead want more EM to maximize your damage. For the third option, Bennett has the 4-set Crimson Witch of Flames, being the absolute best set for him should you want to use him as a typical on-field melt or vaporized DPS. Because of his low skill cooldown, he can actually make full use of the pyro damage bonuses in the 4-piece effect. His fourth options are the 4-set Gilded Dreams or Flowers of Paradise Lost. I mentioned these two together since they will serve the same purpose, making Bennett an amazing Burgeon trigger. So, you know how Burgeon is one of those odd reactions that hurts your on-field character, right? Well, Bennett basically takes that problem and throws it out the window. He can make Dendro Cores explode while healing himself simultaneously. That gives you a 2-in-1 package where you can deal a lot of damage while not needing to worry about keeping yourself alive nearly as much. I should mention Flowers of Paradise Lost is ever so slightly better than Gilded Dreams for Burgeon, but Gilded Dreams is significantly more worth it it to farm due to being paired with Deepwood Memories so that you can equip that on another character to reduce the danger resistance on enemies. Finally, Bennett works great with the 4 set of Thundering Fury. Again, a seemingly oddball artifact set, but hear me out. Combining his already low skill cooldown plus the skill cooldown reduction effect of this set when you use electro-related reactions, you can basically spam his skill and get ridiculously overloaded damage. While it isn't usually the best reaction, it can be a fun side build to use. Alright, you have an idea of what sets Bennett can use, so what main stats does he want? For this section, I'll be listing a few sets of main stats, and you can pick the one best suited to your account. Starting with the Sands, Bennett can use a wide multitude of main stats, having the options of HP%, ER, attack %, or EM. On the note of energy recharge, since Bennett is already great at generating energy thanks to his low skill cooldown, you might as well speed it up. Bennett's preferred ER range should be around 200 to 250%. If you get somewhere in that ballpark, you should have no problem getting his burst on cooldown. HP% can be used if you already have enough energy recharge with your subs or weapon. Same thing with attack % or EM if you want to either use him for Melt Vaporize or Burgeon, if you're not overly worried about his healing per tick. For his goblets, Bennett wants to use HP%, Pyro Damage bonus, or EM. If you're going to use the Melt Vaporize route, using Pyro Damage bonus here will be the best for him. Lastly, for his circlet, Bennett prefers healing bonus to maximize his healing roll, crit %, whichever one you have less of, and finally EM again. ER, HP, and healing bonus is great for making him a pure support that mostly heals and gives the attack buff. Would highly recommend this build at C0 to get the attack buff as soon as possible because of needing to be at 70% or more HP. Attack or ER or EM, Pyro Damage bonus, and crit % is amazing for using him as a sub or main DPS in Melt or Vaporize teams. Finally, full EM can be used for his Burgeon trigger build as well as on-field Thundering Fury spam. In terms of your subs that focus on Bennett, prioritize artifacts that have ER until you can use his burst for every rotation, then HP if you're choosing to run him as full heal support. Otherwise, prioritize crit, then attack, and EM for more damage. Burgeon and Thundering Fury are different in that you would want to fully focus on ER and EM to maximize Burgeon damage, then HP for healing so that you don't end up blowing yourself up. So now that you've got artifacts on Bennett, what weapon should you equip on him? A good weapon for Bennett isn't hard to find at all. Seeing as his buff solely relies on how high your base attack is, just pick whatever weapon that has the highest. But even if it isn't the highest, it could still be really good. Let's start from the free options going up. Prototype Ranker is a really good starting option and one that's given to you for free. If you decide to max level it, it will have 565 base attack. The substat may not be the greatest and the effect doesn't help his buff, but just because it has the second highest base attack stat for a 4-star sword possible, it's not a bad pick. Although, about that, once you have access to Sumeru and have done a portion of the Aranyaka story quest, you can buy the blueprint for the Sapwood Blade. Same base attack, but instead of a useless substat, it gives energy recharge. Super nice since Bennett already wants a lot of it, so getting more is always welcome. On top of that, when you trigger a Dendro-related reaction, the weapon drops a leaf that gives your active character 60 to 120 EM when it's picked up. Nice buff, although it can be hard to make use of. Next up is Iron Sting. Not better than the other two, but it is amazing if you want to use him in Burgeon or Thundering Fury because of its EM. Favoni's sword can be really good, even if it has a lower base attack stat, because it can greatly lower the amount of energy recharge you need to build on both Bennett and the rest of your team. The last 4-star weapon that I'll suggest is the Alley Flash. It boasts the highest base attack out of all the 4-star swords, so if you're not lacking the energy recharge you need to burst every rotation, it will definitely be a good option. I'll give an honorable mention to the Festering Desire since it is a really old event weapon that is pretty good for Bennett with its 510 base attack and decent energy recharge stat. Let's now move on to Bennett's 5-star options. All of them are good. Jade Cutter, Light of Foliar Incision, Haran Gepakafutsu, and the Summit Shaper are pretty good for his on-field DPS build, especially at C6. Key of Cosner's Suit and Scoured Blade are really nice at maximizing his full healer build. Freedom Sworn to maximize his Burgeon and Thundering Fury damage, while also supporting the rest of your team's damage. Last but not least, the Penultimate Swords to maximize base attack, the Aquila Favonia, and his overall best in every situation except Burgeon, the Mist Splitter Reforged. Both of those have a 674 total base attack, and Mist Splitter also gives crit and elemental damage bonus in case you want him to do damage. And those are good weapons for Bennett. Let's move on to his Constellations. Is the C6 actually worth activating? All of Bennett's constellations are either really good or they add a little spice to how you can play him, so let's get into them. C1 is by far Bennett's best constellation, removing the restriction of your on-field character needing to be equal to or greater than 70% of their max HP to get the attack buff. Not only that, but it also gives an extra 20% of Bennett's base attack onto the final buff. Excellent constellation all around and unlocks his full potential. Bennett's C2 gives him an extra 30% energy recharge if he's under 70% HP. Not the biggest difference in the world if you already have 220 plus, but can be nice if you are in desperate need of his burst being out for panic healing. C3 and 5 add 3 talent levels to his skill and burst respectively, the latter being a nice boost to his attack buff. C4 is an interesting constellation. See, what it does is add an extra attack if you were to use his health skill and input a normal attack after. It is an extra instance of pyro application, but it also adds more time to your skill cooldown. Generally not recommended to make use of in most situations. Now, we move on to the most controversial constellation in the game, Bennett C6. Not really. It's not that big of a deal. Okay, I should backpedal a bit. Bennett C6 gives a 15% pyro damage bonus to all weapon types as well as a pyro infusion to any sword, claymore, or polearm user. That all sounds great, right? Why am I making it out to sound divisive? Well, as it turns out, not every character wants to do pyro damage, so it can quote-unquote ruin some characters. What I say to that is, nope. For those that know what I'm talking about, hear me out. The biggest argument for this being the case is Eula, since she's the sole representative of the physical DPS category. Let me set this straight for those watching this video. Bennett C6 does not ruin Eula. The attack buff from being inside the field is already offsetting some part of the physical damage she would have lost out on otherwise. And, for your information, the only part of Eula that makes her do damage is her burst, which does not get affected by the pyro infusion. Not to mention that some of her best teams don't even use Bennett. I'll admit that it does ruin the unconventional physical build for other characters should you want to run that, but a physical build would be worse on those characters anyways, so who gives a f***? Another thing to note is, yes, due to the hidden elemental priority mechanic in Genshin, some other characters with soft infusions that can be overwritten will be overwritten by Bennett's, like Keqing's or Ayaka's. But I've got a response to that one too. Unless you're trying to get big screenshot numbers, those two don't even want Bennett on their teams anyways. Keqing has Aggravate, and Ayaka doesn't gain that much from trying to use her as a melt carry as opposed to using her as a freeze carry. So that doesn't matter either. For the majority of the characters, this constellation is actually really good, since it either super buffs pyro characters beyond belief, or gives other characters from other elements the ability to apply pyro to set up their reactions. There are even some characters that have infusions that can't be overwritten, so this constellation doesn't end up hurting them, like Tartaglia, Alhaitham, Ito, and Xiao. To wrap up Bennett's constellations, they are good! They are great! And C6 is not as bad as players say it is. With the constellations over, what teams can you run Bennett in? Oh man, where to even begin? I'm gonna put it this way. You'd have a harder time trying to find teams that Bennett can't fit into. He works in every team setup if you haven't figured it out by now, even ones that don't need pyro in any sense. Why? Because he'd still be a healer and attack buffer. But for the sake of the video, let's go through a few examples. Starting with National, a very basic team setup that uses Shengling's ability to snapshot and Xingqiu's Hydro application to do some really good and easy to achieve damage. The last slot can be one of the big list of characters. You can run another Hydro character like Yelan, and an animal character to reduce enemies' resistances and give further buffs to EM or elemental damage like Sucrose or Kazuha, Raiden to do more burst damage and lower the energy recharge needed for the other characters. Very easy burst spam team setup no matter which 4th slot character you use. The second team is Reverse Vaporize, where you can use either a Hydro Enabler with a Pyro carry, or vice versa, capping off the team with one of another Hydro character or an animal debuffer. Good Hydro options are Xingqiu, Yelan, Tartaglia, and Ayato. For Pyro, you have Shangling, Diluc, Yoimiya, Yanfei, or Hu Tao. The Pyro characters will especially benefit from Bennett's C6 effect. Surely you're seeing a pattern with preferred teammates for Bennett by now, and that trend will continue with Reverse Melt. Using either Shangling or Kazuha and swirling Pyro with him will be enough to apply a good amount of Pyro to melt off of. The premier cryo carrier for this team is Ganyu, but you can also use Rosaria or Kaya to trigger them as well. The last slot is usually flexible for this archetype, but some recommendations to use are a shielder like Zhongli if you're using Ganyu so as to not be interrupted while aiming her charge shots. Another character that's good for this is Nahida if you want to inflict burning on the enemies so as to have a heavier source of pyro application, and she also buffs EM as a nice bonus. The third team option I'll go through is Burgeon. Set him up with the Dendro and Hydra applicator, and you can either make Bennett the Burgeon trigger or have someone else like Kazuha apply it instead, since he already wants to be built on EM anyways. Good Dendro choices are Nahida and Dendro Traveler. Keep in mind that you will need to be more careful if you're using Dendro Traveler as your applicator, since you can't hit their bulb with Pyro first, or else it will prematurely end the ability. Good Hydras are again Xingqiu, Yelan, or Child. The main reason why this archetype can be good with Bennett is because he can both apply a Pyro onto the seeds to make them explode, as well as healing off the damage from it. The last team I want to cover is Thundering Fury Overvape. This should be seen as more of a fun option than it is practical, because Overloaded is a piece of shit reaction that ungroups enemies in a game that makes you want to group enemies. For this reason, this playstyle can only truly shine against bosses or heavier enemies. The main gimmick of this team is to have Bennett hold the 4 set of Thundering Fury, and set up enough Electro to be able to further reduce the cooldown of his already low cooldown skill through the 4-piece effect of the artifact set. You can add a Hydro character to trigger some odd electric charges or vaporized reactions that may happen as well to further boost your damage. From there, you can add another electric character for your last slot, or an anima to reduce elemental resistances with the 4 set of Viridescent Venerer. Good electro candidates are Lisa, Beidou, and or Yaimiko. Hydro can be Xingqiu or Yelan, and finally, in the case of using an animal character, your best options are Sucrose, Kazuha, or Venti. Now, I know I just listed off some teams you can use, but how about seeing them in action? It's showcase time! For this showcase, I'll be using him in these 3 roles: full support, DPS, or Burgeon trigger. In all cases, he'll be level 90, with a Crown Burst being at level 10 or 13. For the support build, I'll be using 4 Sentinel Bless Oblige, DPS on 4 Crimson Witch of Flames, Burgeon on 4 Gilded Dreams, and Overvape on 4 Thundering Fury. Here are the builds for each role. Without any further delays, let's get into it. Roll the clips.
Everybody stand back.
Fallen leaves, adorn my night. You can run, but you can't hide. Time to go.
Teamwork is true.
So clouds high, the birds call. One with nature.
Take it easy. Things are about to get dicey. Busted. Gotcha.
Fallen leaves, adorn my night.
Let me weave you a verse. Everybody stand back. Yeah. Adventure time. Game's up. Fun's over. Busted. Quietly now.
One with wind and cloud. Wind strike.
Witness the power of good rock. Teamwork is dreamwork. Let's light it up. Here comes the catch. Busted.
Fallen leaves, adorn. Into the wind.
Let me weave you a verse. Know my sword. Going in. Let's light it up. Game's up. Fun's over. Gotcha. Quietly now.
Clouds high, the birds call.
Rain cutter. Everybody stand back.
I see everything. Temple of Wisdom.
Busted. Things are about to get dicey. Gotcha. Going in. I'm getting. Let's light it up.
To wrap up this video, Bennett is one of the quintessential characters in Genshin Impact. He can fit onto any team with his ability to heal, buff attack, and apply pyro. He can achieve great results with minimal investment into his artifact stats and scales incredibly well with DPS-oriented stat focuses. For more details, check out the Kuching Main's guide linked in the description down below. Leave a like and comment down below if this guide was helpful to you. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back for another video. See ya.